Chapter 1. A Fateful Collision. Manhattan never slowed its pace, not even when rain poured down as if to drown the entire city. Skyscrapers gleamed with lights, and streams of people hurried past one another under colorful umbrellas. Ivy Carter, 26, had no umbrella and no time to care. She jogged along the sidewalk, her sneakers splashing through puddles, her brown hair tied high and swaying in the wind. In her hand was a briefcase holding her designs, the only thing standing between her and a life-changing opportunity, a contract with a major client. "Just don't be late for this meeting," Ivy muttered, glancing at her watch. 15 minutes left. Enough time to reach the office building a few blocks away, if nothing got in her way. But Manhattan was never that simple. A sleek black Bentley sped by, hugging the curb. Then, as if to taunt her, its tires hit a large puddle, sending a wave of filthy water crashing over Ivy. She stopped dead, mud dripping from her coat to her jeans, soaking her to the skin. The briefcase, thankfully, stayed dry, but that did little to quell her rage. "Jerk!" Ivy shouted, her voice echoing through the rain. Without a second thought, she stormed toward the car, now stopped at an intersection, and pounded on the window. Thud, thud, thud. The sharp sound cut through the air. "Open the door right now!" The window slid down slowly, like a scene staged for drama. Ivy braced herself to unleash a tirade on the careless driver, but when she saw the man inside, she faltered for a moment. Not because he was handsome, though admittedly he was distractingly so. Dark hair neatly swept back, gray eyes cold as steel, and a half-smile both arrogant and enigmatic. He wore a black suit, so expensive Ivy could practically smell the money from where she stood. "Is there a problem?" His voice was deep, calm, almost amused. Ivy blinked, snapping herself out of it. Handsome or not, it didn't matter. He'd just ruined her day. "A problem," she snapped, pointing at her drenched clothes. "What kind of driving was that? You think you own the whole road? Look at me, I'm soaked." The man raised an eyebrow, his gaze sweeping over her from head to toe. Not leering, but as if assessing something new. He leaned forward, resting an arm on the car door. "You look fine to me. It's just a bit of water." "A bit of water?" Ivy nearly shouted, stunned by his audacity. "Do you have any idea how rushed I am? I have an important meeting, and now I look like I swam across the Hudson." A few passers-by paused, curious about the scene. Someone raised a phone, a flash cutting through the rain. Ivy didn't notice. She was too busy glaring at the man in front of her, who remained unfazed as if she were just a passing breeze. "An important meeting," he repeated, his tone savoring each word. "So why are you standing here arguing with me?" Ivy's jaw dropped. Not only was he thoughtless, but he had the nerve to challenge her. "Because you owe me an apology." She crossed her arms, standing in front of the car so he couldn't drive off. "A proper apology right now." The man studied her, a glint in his eyes. Not anger, but something like intrigue. He opened the car door and stepped out, ignoring the rain wetting his suit jacket. Towering over her, he leaned down just enough for their eyes to meet. "You just did something no one else has dared to do," he said, his voice low enough to send a shiver down Ivy's spine. "That's interesting." Ivy stepped back, not out of fear, but because his sudden closeness threw her off guard. "Interesting? You think this is a joke?" She gestured at the growing crowd. "Look, the whole world's watching you humiliate me." He glanced at the onlookers, then back at her, the corner of his mouth lifting into a real smile. Not polite or mocking, but the smile of someone who'd found something worth pursuing. "No, you've got it wrong," he said, pulling a white silk handkerchief from his pocket and offering it to her. "You're the one humiliating me, and I like it." Ivy blinked, her hand instinctively taking the handkerchief. It was soft, scented with woody cologne, so luxurious she almost threw it back. But she didn't. Instead, she wiped the mud from her face, glaring at him. "Thanks for the handkerchief," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "But next time, drive more carefully, unless you want to get yelled at again." He laughed, a deep sound that made a few bystanders turn their heads. "Oh, I'm looking forward to next time." Ivy didn't reply. She turned and walked away, trying to salvage what little pride she had left. The rain kept falling, but her anger had cooled slightly, replaced by an odd feeling, as if she'd just stepped into a game whose rules she didn't yet understand. As she disappeared around the corner, the man, Aidan Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood International, stood still in the rain, his eyes following her. He bent down, picking up a business card that had fallen from Ivy's bag during their argument. Ivy Carter, interior designer, he read aloud, his finger tracing the phone number printed on it. A slow smile spread across his face. "We'll meet again, Miss Carter." Hours later, Ivy sat curled up in her small Brooklyn apartment, her hair still damp and her mood worse than ever. The meeting hadn't gone badly. She'd presented well, and the client was pleased. But the memory of the man in the Bentley still haunted her. "Who's that shameless?" she muttered, tossing the silk handkerchief onto the table. She meant to throw it out, but didn't. It was too nice, and a small part of her didn't want to admit that its scent was oddly pleasant. She opened her phone to check emails, but a social media notification stopped her cold. A video was going viral at breakneck speed titled, "Woman Confronts Mystery CEO in Manhattan Streets." The hashtag Mystery CEO was trending at number 3. Ivy clicked through the video and her heart skipped a beat. There she was, drenched, pointing and yelling at the mysterious man. He stood there unruffled, his half-smile suggesting he owned the world. The comments below were flooded with speculation. Who is this guy? What CEO is that good-looking? This woman's got guts, calling him out like that. They look like a couple straight out of a movie. Ivy shut off her phone and tossed it onto the couch. "A couple, my foot," she muttered, but her cheeks felt inexplicably warm. She stood, opened the fridge to find something to eat, and tried to shake off the image of those cold gray eyes. She didn't know that, across Manhattan, in a luxurious office on the top floor of Blackwood International, Aidan Blackwood sat before his computer screen. On his desk was Ivy's business card, and on the screen was the video of their argument. He watched it over and over, pausing each time at the moment Ivy glared at him, her eyes blazing like fire. "For the first time," he murmured, leaning back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk. "The first time someone's made me want to break the rules." He saved Ivy's number to his contacts in no rush to call. He knew she'd cross his path again soon. Fate had already decided it. Chapter 2. An Accidental Adversary. Ivy Carter stood before the Blackwood International Tower, craning her neck to take in the shimmering glass floors stretching toward the sky. Manhattan had countless buildings like this, but this one exuded a power that demanded respect. She gripped her briefcase of designs tightly, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Today was the biggest opportunity of her career, a chance to design the interiors for the new headquarters of one of the world's leading corporations. There was no room for error. She'd spent the entire week preparing, pulling all-nighters to perfect every detail. Everything had to be flawless. Yet the memory of the man in the Bentley from yesterday kept distracting her. The way he smirked, offered her that silk handkerchief, and spoke in that deep voice as if he owned the world. It all left her both irritated and unforgettable. "Come on, Ivy," she muttered to herself, stepping through the revolving glass doors. "Today's not the day to think about arrogant jerks." Inside, the lobby was vast, like a museum, with polished marble floors and abstract paintings on the walls. The receptionist gave a professional smile, directing her to the 48th floor where the meeting would take place. Ivy adjusted her blazer, checking her hair in the elevator. She looked fine. No trace of the drenched woman yelling in the street yesterday. The meeting room on the 48th floor was sleek and modern, with a long wooden table, black leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan's skyline. A group was already seated, a few project directors, an investor, and some senior staff. Ivy smiled, shaking hands with each, trying to project confidence despite her racing heart. "Ms. Carter, please have a seat," an older man, likely the project manager, said. "We're eager to hear your ideas." Ivy nodded, setting her briefcase down and preparing the projector. She was plugging in her USB when the door swung open, and someone entered. The room's atmosphere shifted instantly. People sat up straighter, voices hushed. Ivy looked up and her heart skipped a beat. Aidan Blackwood. There he stood, tall in a dark gray suit, his black hair neatly swept back, his cold gray eyes scanning the room before landing on her. His lips curved, not quite a smile, but an expression loaded with meaning, as if he'd known she'd be here. Aiden strode to the head of the table, sitting with the ease of someone who owned the world. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice deep and deliberate, "I'm looking forward to your presentation. Don't disappoint me like you did on the street yesterday." The room went silent. A few people exchanged glances, clearly curious about his cryptic remark. Ivy felt heat rush to her face. He just publicly referenced their argument in front of all these important people? She gripped her pencil tightly, forcing herself to stay calm. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," she replied, emphasizing Mr. with a hint of sarcasm. "I hope my designs satisfy you more than your driving skills." A stifled chuckle came from the corner, quickly suppressed. Aiden raised an eyebrow, a spark of amusement in his eyes. "We'll see," he said, gesturing for her to begin. Ivy took a deep breath, turned on the projector, and launched into her presentation. Her concept blended modern style with natural inspiration: clear glass walls, warm wooden furniture, and a hanging garden within the office. She spoke with confidence, every slide meticulously prepared, every answer to a question, sharp and precise. But Aiden wouldn't let her off easy. "Ms. Carter, how do you ensure the hanging garden doesn't inflate maintenance costs?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes challenging. Ivy answered immediately. "I've calculated costs with suppliers for automated irrigation systems. It saves 30% compared to traditional methods." Aiden nodded slightly but didn't relent. "And lighting? Glass walls could cause glare in the afternoon. I propose UV-resistant glass with adjustable light transmission," Ivy replied without hesitation. "You can review the details on page 12. On and on it went, Aiden firing tough questions as if deliberately trying to corner her. But Ivy didn't back down. Each time he probed, she countered with wit and precision, keeping the room both tense and captivated. One project director even whispered to a colleague, "She's not fazed by Mr. Blackwood. That's rare." When the presentation ended, the room erupted in applause. Ivy exhaled, relieved, but before she could pack up, Aiden spoke. "Ms. Carter, stay a moment. I'd like to discuss the project further." Ivy froze, meeting his gaze. His eyes were no longer as icy but carried something unreadable. She nodded reluctantly as the others filed out. When it was just the two of them, Ivy crossed her arms, facing him. "If you're going to keep bringing up yesterday, I'm not interested," she said firmly. "I'm here to work, not play cat and mouse." Aiden stood, slowly closing the distance between them. He towered over her, his presence shrinking the room. "You're mistaken," he said, his voice low. "I don't want you to back off. On the contrary, I want you to stay, to work directly with me." Ivy blinked, disbelief washing over her. "Work with you? I'd rather work with a cat." Aiden laughed, the sound echoing in the empty room. "Good. I like cats." She glared, searching for any sign of mockery, but he just held her gaze, unflinching. Ivy felt a warmth creep up her spine. Not anger, but something she didn't want to acknowledge. "Why?" she asked, her voice quieter. "Why me?" Aiden tilted his head as if her question intrigued him. "Because you're the only one who's yelled in my face in the middle of the street and still made me want to hear more." Ivy didn't reply. She turned, gathering her things, hiding the flush in her cheeks. "I'll consider it," she said, though she knew the contract was too important to refuse. "But don't expect me to follow your every whim." "I don't," Aiden replied, his tone light but loaded. "I expect you to be yourself." She left the meeting room, her heart beating faster than usual. It felt like she'd just entered a chess game, and Aiden Blackwood was no easy opponent. But Ivy Carter had never shied away from a challenge. If he wanted to play, she'd show him she wasn't a pawn on his board. Meanwhile, in his private office on the top floor, Aiden sat before a large screen, replaying yesterday's argument video. The image of Ivy, soaked and pointing as she scolded him, was crystal clear. He paused at the moment she glared at him, her eyes burning like fire. "Your trouble," he murmured, a smirk tugging at his lips. "But your trouble I want." He picked up Ivy's business card from the desk, his finger tracing the text. "Ivy Carter, interior designer." He hadn't called the number yet, but he knew Soon enough, she'd become an indispensable part of his world. Ivy Carter strode into Blackwood International's headquarters with a mix of determination and defiance. Today marked her third day officially working on the corporation's interior design project, and her third day facing Aiden Blackwood. After last week's tense meeting, she'd reluctantly agreed to work directly with him, but that didn't mean she'd follow his orders meekly. If Aiden thought he could control her the way he ran his empire, he was gravely mistaken. She pushed open the meeting room door, deliberately 5 minutes late. Inside, Aiden stood before a whiteboard, discussing plans with a group of architects. He wore a crisp white dress shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal toned forearms, his gaze sharp as a blade. When Ivy entered, he paused mid-sentence looking at her. "Ms. Carter," he said, his tone even but laced with faint sarcasm. "So glad you finally decided to join us." Ivy smiled, unapologetic. "Sorry, Mr. Blackwood. I was busy finding a coffee better than the stuff in this room." She held up a paper cup as proof, then sauntered to a chair. A few architects stifled laughs, but Aiden merely raised an eyebrow, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "I hope that coffee was worth it," he said, resuming the meeting as if nothing had happened. Ivy didn't stop at tardiness. All week, she subtly defied Aiden's rules in ways calculated to get his attention. She sent revised designs without prior approval, adding bold touches like orange chairs in the reception area, knowing full well they'd irk him. During one meeting, she even called him Mr. Ice when he challenged her idea, prompting laughter from the room. "Mr. Ice?" Aiden repeated, his voice low, eyes fixed on her. "You seem fond of nicknames, Ms. Carter." "Only when they fit," Ivy shot back, shrugging. "What do you prefer, Mr. Frost or Mr. Glacier?" The room fell silent, awaiting Aiden's reaction, but he only smiled. A slow, deliberate smile that made Ivy's heart skip a beat for a split second. "I'll take whichever you like best," he said, then steered the meeting back on track, leaving Ivy feeling both victorious and unsettled. Aiden, however, didn't let her run wild unchecked. He assigned her near-impossible tasks: complete 3D renderings for the entire 50th floor in 3 days, source rare furniture suppliers within 24 hours, or convince a difficult client to reverse a prior contract rejection. Each time, Ivy thought she'd fail, but she gritted her teeth, made endless calls, and stayed up until 3 a.m. to get it done. And each time she delivered, exceeding expectations. "Not bad," Aiden said after reviewing her 3D renderings, his tone almost approving. "But next time, I want it faster." "Faster?" Ivy snapped, standing from the meeting table. "Do you want me to grow wings or something?" "Maybe," he replied, his eyes gleaming. "I'd like to see you fly." She glared at him, but couldn't deny one thing. Aiden's challenges made her feel more alive than ever. Things escalated one Friday afternoon when Ivy brought a stack of documents to Aiden's temporary office to report on progress. He sat behind his desk, sunlight from the large window highlighting his chiseled features. Ivy set the papers down, but her hand accidentally knocked over Aiden's coffee cup, spilling it across his white dress shirt. "Oh no!" Ivy exclaimed. But instead of apologizing, she burst out laughing. "So you can look flustered." Aiden glanced at the coffee stain spreading across his shirt, then up at her. No anger, no frown. Instead, he stood, slowly shrugging off his suit jacket, revealing the shirt now clinging to his frame from the spill. Ivy swallowed hard, trying not to notice the muscles outlined through the damp fabric. "Flustered?" he asked, stepping closer. "You sure about that?" Ivy took a step back, but her back hit the desk. "Completely sure," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "You should thank me. The coffee makes you look less icy." Aiden chuckled, a warm, low sound that seemed to vibrate in the air. "Ms. Carter, you have a knack for making things chaotic." "And you have a knack for making things difficult," she retorted, refusing to back down. They stood there mere feet apart, their gazes locked like swords clashing in a duel. Neither yielded. Finally, Aiden returned to his desk, pulling a clean shirt from a drawer. "Be more careful next time," he said, but his tone held no reproach. Ivy left the office, her heart racing faster than she cared to admit. She told herself it was just adrenaline from the confrontation. Not Aiden's eyes or the way he looked at her like she was the only puzzle he wanted to solve. That evening, Ivy sprawled on her apartment's couch, laptop open in front of her. She was checking emails when a new notification popped up. Sender, Aiden Blackwood. Subject, none. Frowning, she opened it. Just one line. You're keeping me up at night. First time in 32 years. Ivy reread it, disbelief washing over her. Was he joking? Or was this another provocation? She started typing a reply but stopped. Don't even think about it, Ivy, she muttered, shutting the laptop. He's just playing cat and mouse. But as she turned off the light, the image of Aiden standing in the office glow, coffee-soaked shirt and all, flashed vividly in her mind. She shook her head, trying to dismiss it. But a small part of her wondered, if this was a game, why did she want to keep playing? Meanwhile, in a luxurious Upper East Side penthouse, Aiden sat before a fireplace, a glass of red wine in hand. He hadn't turned on the lights, letting the firelight dance across his face. A stack of project documents lay on the table, unread. Instead, he thought of Ivy, her laugh when she spilled the coffee, the fearless way she called him Mr. Ice. He'd never met anyone like her. Not models, not business partners, not anyone in his calculated world. Ivy Carter was a storm, and for the first time, Aiden wanted to be swept up in it. He took a sip of wine, smiling to himself. Miss Carter, he murmured, you're not getting away. Chapter 3, The Reluctant Dinner. Ivy Carter stood before the mirror in her small apartment, adjusting a simple yet elegant black dress. She wasn't one for dresses, but Aiden Blackwood's invitation to a high-end midtown restaurant left no room for casual attire. Business discussion, he'd written in a curt email, his tone almost commanding. Ivy grimaced, recalling the impossible tasks he'd thrown at her all week. She didn't want to go, but the Blackwood International contract was an opportunity she couldn't pass up. She sighed, smoothing her hair, muttering to herself, it's just dinner. You've got this, Ivy. Deep down, though, she knew Aiden wasn't just interested in blueprints or hanging gardens. There was something in his gaze, not the coldness of a CEO, but something that made her both curious and wary. Le Ciel, the restaurant, sat on the 60th floor of a skyscraper, offering a dazzling view of Manhattan's twinkling lights. Its opulent interior boasted crystal chandeliers and white silk tablecloths, exuding a luxury Ivy had only seen in movies. She stepped inside, her heels clicking softly on the polished wood floor, instantly aware of the other diners' glances. Aiden was already there, seated by a massive window, looking as if he owned the place. He wore a deep blue suit, no tie, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar to reveal the line of his collarbone. When he saw Ivy, he stood, pulling out her chair with a courtesy that caught her off guard. Ms. Carter, he said, his voice low, you look different tonight. Ivy frowned, sitting down. Different how? Not drenched or covered in coffee? Aiden chuckled, his eyes glinting. Different in a way that almost made me forget what I was going to say. She shot him a look, but the corner of her mouth twitched upward. Did you invite me here to flatter me or to talk business? Business, of course, he replied, sliding a folder of documents toward her. But I'm not opposed to doing both. Ivy opened the folder, trying to focus on the figures and sketches, but Aiden's presence made it hard to stay composed. He spoke about the project with razor-sharp insight, offering suggestions to optimize the 50th floor's layout. But every so often he'd pause, his gaze lingering on her longer than necessary. Each time Ivy had to remind herself this was just work, nothing more. The conversation was going smoothly until a familiar voice interrupted, making Ivy freeze. Ivy Carter? Didn't expect to see you here. She looked up, her heart sinking. Mark, her ex-boyfriend, stood a few steps from the table, his arm around a young woman with glossy blonde hair. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it, just mockery. Mark, Ivy said, her voice stiff. She tried to stay calm, but memories of painful months flooded back. Mark had left her when she needed him most, when her family was drowning in debt to chase a wealthier woman. You look decent, Mark said, his eyes flicking over her dress. But I'm guessing Le Ciel isn't your usual spot, right? Or are you trying to impress someone? The woman beside Mark giggled, covering her mouth as if it were a clever joke. Ivy gripped her napkin, humiliation rising. She opened her mouth to retort, But before she could, Aiden spoke. She doesn't need to impress anyone, he said, his voice low but sharp as a blade. He stood, walked around the table, and took Ivy's hand, pulling her to stand beside him. She doesn't need you anymore. She has me. Ivy blinked, too shocked to react immediately. Had Aiden just declared her his? In front of Mark? In front of the entire restaurant? She looked up at him, searching for a hint of jest, but his expression was serious, even tinged with anger as he stared at Mark. Mark frowned, clearly caught off guard. And you are? Aiden Blackwood, he replied, his tone implying the name alone ended all questions. He squeezed Ivy's hand lightly, as if to reassure her. And you, clearly, are someone who didn't value what he had. The air grew thick with tension. Mark gave an awkward laugh, stepping back. Well, congrats, Ivy, he said, his voice bitter. Looks like you found someone better than me. He turned, pulling the blonde woman away, but Ivy stood frozen, her hand still in Aiden's, her mind a whirlwind. She yanked her hand free, turning to him, her voice trembling with anger and confusion. Who gave you the right to meddle in my life? She snapped, loud enough for nearby tables to glance over. Who do you think you are, playing my boyfriend? Aiden didn't flinch. He leaned closer, meeting her eyes, and smiled. That slow, infuriating smile that made her want to both punch him and not look away. That's the second time you've yelled in my face, he said, his voice light but laced with delight. I like it. Ivy's jaw dropped, stunned by his audacity. Is something wrong with you? I'm serious. So am I, he replied, sitting back down and gesturing for her to do the same. Sit, Ms. Carter, unless you want the whole restaurant to know we're arguing. Ivy glanced around, noticing the curious stares. Reluctantly, she sat, crossing her arms. You owe me an explanation, she said, quieter but still sharp. Aiden took a sip of wine, then looked at her, his gaze softer than before. I saw him hurting you, he said. I didn't like it, that's all. Ivy blinked, caught off guard by his bluntness. She wanted to argue, to say she didn't need protecting, but something in his voice silenced her. She looked down, pretending to study the menu, hiding the turmoil inside. Dinner resumed, but the mood had shifted. They talked business, but Ivy's quips were fewer, and Aiden didn't prod as usual. When the meal ended, the air outside had turned chilly, and Ivy shivered as she stepped onto the sidewalk. Wait, Aiden said, shrugging off his suit jacket and draping it over her shoulders before she could protest. The jacket was warm, carrying his scent of wood and mint. I don't need... Ivy started, but he cut her off. I don't like seeing you upset, he said, holding her gaze. Next time, yell at me instead of holding it in. Ivy stood still, unsure how to respond. He didn't wait for an answer, just nodded to the driver pulling up, then walked away. She watched his retreating figure, clutching the jacket, her heart pounding harder than she wanted to admit. Back at her apartment, Ivy hung the jacket over a chair, her eyes lingering on the expensive fabric. She shook her head, telling herself Aiden was just playing a power game, that he didn't truly care. But as she lay in bed, the image of him standing up to Mark kept resurfacing, and for the first time she wondered, if he wasn't just a cold CEO, then who was he? Ivy Carter had lost count of how many times she wondered why Aiden Blackwood kept weaving himself into her life. From tense meetings to midnight emails, he always found a way to pull her into his world, a world both alluring and dangerous. This week, he'd taken his disruptions to a new level. It started with a site visit to a plot of land outside Manhattan, where Aiden planned to build a new office complex. Ivy couldn't fathom why a CEO like him would personally oversee it instead of leaving it to the architects. But when she arrived, there he was in a long black coat, looking at her as if she were the sole reason he was there. Ms. Carter, he said, handing her a tablet with a map of the area. I need your input on the layout for green spaces. Ivy frowned, taking the tablet. Don't you have an entire team for this? Or do you just enjoy wasting my time? Aiden smiled, walking beside her across the expansive site. I value input from someone who speaks their mind. You're the best choice. She shot him a glare but couldn't deny he had a knack for making her feel essential. It didn't end there. A few days later, Aiden asked her to redesign his personal office at Blackwood International's headquarters. It lacks personality, he said, sitting behind his desk with an unreadable expression. Ivy suspected he just wanted to keep her close, but she agreed, partly for the contract, partly out of curiosity about his next move. She decided to push back. While rearranging his office, Ivy secretly hung a humorous painting, a cat in glasses sitting at a desk with the caption, "Boss Meow," right behind Aiden's chair. She knew he'd notice, but she didn't expect his reaction. The next day, during a meeting with partners, one of them chuckled upon seeing the painting. "Mr. Blackwood, I didn't know you had such a sense of humor," he said. Ivy, standing in the corner, bit her lip to stifle a laugh, bracing for a scowl or reprimand from Aiden. But he merely glanced at the painting, then at her, his eyes twinkling. "I'm keeping it," he said after the partners left. "It reminds me of you." Ivy froze, unsure how to respond. "Reminds you of me? Because I'm like a cat, or because I annoy you?" "Because you make things memorable," he replied, stepping closer, "in whatever way you choose." She turned away, pretending to check her blueprints, but her heart raced faster than she liked. Aiden was playing a dangerous game, and she wasn't sure she could keep her distance forever. Their interactions began to shift how they saw each other. One late evening, as they stayed behind to finalize a report, Aiden suddenly asked, "Have you ever thought about giving up when things get too hard?" Ivy paused her typing, caught off guard by the question. She looked at him, noticing his eyes lacked their usual sharpness. "Yeah," she admitted. "When my family was drowning in debt, I worked 3 jobs at once. Some days I just wanted to run away. But then I thought, if I quit, who'd take care of them?" Aiden was quiet, his gaze distant. After a moment, he said, his voice low, "I lost my mother when I was young. My father wasn't the loving type. He only knew expectations. I grew up feeling that if I wasn't perfect, I didn't deserve to exist." Ivy blinked, stunned by his openness. She wanted to offer comfort, but instead asked, "So how did you keep going?" "I learned not to feel," he said, but the way he looked at her suggested otherwise. In that moment, Ivy realized Aiden wasn't just a powerful CEO. He was a man carrying scars just like her. They started sharing more, not grand stories, but small pieces. How she once fell asleep on a bus from overwork. How he secretly loved listening to jazz on weekends. Each time the wall between them thinned, though both maintained a careful distance. That weekend, Aiden convinced Ivy to attend a charity gala hosted by Blackwood International. "You're part of the project," he said over the phone. "Your presence will make a good impression." Ivy reluctantly agreed, but at the grand ballroom, she felt out of place among glittering gowns and expensive champagne. She chose a quiet corner, watching Aiden from afar. He moved through the crowd with effortless confidence, shaking hands and smiling. But his eyes occasionally sought her out, as if checking she was still there. She was sipping water when a woman entered, commanding every gaze. Tall, with glossy blonde hair, she wore a striking red dress that hugged her figure. She made a beeline for Aiden. Before Ivy could process it, the woman threw her arms around him, her hands wrapping intimately around his neck. "Aiden," she said, her voice sweet but edged with ice. "I'm back. Do you remember our promise?" Ivy stood still, the glass in her hand suddenly heavy. She watched Aiden, waiting for his reaction, but he only froze, his expression unreadable. The woman turned to Ivy, her smile provocative. "Hello," she said. "I'm Sophia Langston. Has Aiden mentioned me?" Ivy felt a sharp pang in her chest. Not jealousy, or so she told herself, but the sting of betrayal. She'd started to believe Aiden genuinely cared for her, but now she wasn't sure. "I'm Ivy Carter," she replied, her voice calm but cold. "And no, he hasn't mentioned anything." Sophia's smile sharpened like a blade. "Oh, don't worry. He will soon enough." Ivy turned away, unwilling to stay a second longer. She stepped onto the hotel balcony, breathing in the cold air to steady herself. But her heart felt heavy, as if part of her had hoped for too much from Aiden Blackwood. Inside the ballroom, Aiden watched Ivy's retreating figure, his grip tightening on his glass. Sophia stood there, smiling as if she'd never left. But he didn't care about her. His mind was consumed by Ivy, the hurt in her eyes as she walked away. Chapter 4. The Embrace in the Rain. Rain poured relentlessly over the suburban field, tall grass swaying in the wind. Ivy Carter stood under a small umbrella, her thin coat clinging to her from the damp. She and Aidan Blackwood were here to survey a new plot for Blackwood International's expansion project, the second such trip he'd insisted she join this month. Ivy didn't complain, not because she enjoyed it, but because she knew refusing Aidan would only invite more of his teasing. But today she wasn't feeling right. Her head was heavy, her throat dry, and shivers ran down her spine. She'd ignored the signs since morning, telling herself it was just the cold weather. Ivy Carter wasn't weak. She'd endured worse days than this. She couldn't let Aidan or anyone think she'd crumble easily. Aidan stood a few steps away, talking with the site manager. He wore a gray sweater and slacks, no suit, looking more approachable than usual. But his eyes were still sharp, scanning the land like a general assessing a battlefield. Every so often he glanced at Ivy, as if checking if she was up to something unexpected. "Ms. Carter," he called, his voice carrying over the rain. "Your thoughts on the eastern section? I want an open space, but with privacy." Ivy took a deep breath, steadying her voice. "The east has higher ground, ideal for a rooftop garden, but the foundation needs reinforcement to prevent erosion." She pointed into the distance, but her hand trembled slightly. She quickly hid it in her pocket, hoping he didn't notice. Aidan nodded, but his gaze lingered on her longer than usual. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice lower, almost concerned. "Perfectly fine," Ivy replied quickly, turning away to avoid his eyes. "The rain's just annoying." He said nothing more, but Ivy felt him watching her. She bit her lip, forcing herself to focus on the conversation with the manager, but her head started to spin. The rain grew heavier, seeping through her thin umbrella, and she no longer had the strength to hide it. When the manager left, Ivy sat on a nearby rock, pretending to check notes on her phone. But her vision blurred, and before she could react, her legs gave out. "Ivy!" Aidan's voice rang out, closer than she expected. She felt his arms catch her before she hit the ground. The rain kept falling, but she no longer felt cold. Just his warmth and his voice, urgent and tense. "What's wrong with you?" he demanded, almost angry. He knelt, one arm holding her, the other touching her forehead. "God, you're burning up." "I'm fine," Ivy whispered, but her voice was so weak even she didn't believe it. She tried to push him away, but he didn't budge. "Fine my ass," Aidan growled. Then without another word, he scooped her up and carried her toward the car. Ivy wanted to protest, to say she didn't need rescuing, but her body wouldn't obey. She rested her head on his shoulder, his breath brushing her hair, and for the first time, she felt strangely safe. In the car, Aidan cranked up the heater, wrapping his coat around her. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" he said, glancing at her as he drove. "You're more stubborn than I thought." Ivy wanted to retort, but her eyelids grew heavy. She drifted off, catching only the sound of rain and his muttered words, too faint to make out. When Ivy woke, she was lying in a hotel room bed, soft yellow light glowing on the ceiling. She blinked, trying to piece together what had happened. Her head still ached, but the dizziness had eased. Looking down, she saw she was wearing a dry t-shirt, not hers, and a blanket tucked around her. "Aidan!" she called, her voice hoarse. He appeared from the corner, holding a steaming mug. He'd swapped his wet sweater for a black dress shirt, his hair still damp from the rain. "You're awake," he said, sitting by the bed. "Drink this. The doctor said you need rest." "Doctor?" Ivy frowned, taking the mug. "You called a doctor just because I had a fever?" "Just because?" Aidan raised an eyebrow, his eyes darkening. "You collapsed in front of me, Ivy. Don't scare me like that again." She blinked, caught off guard by the worry in his voice. She sipped the water, hiding the warmth spreading through her chest. "I didn't mean to," she said softly. "I just didn't want to seem weak." Aidan looked at her, his gaze gentler than ever. "Being sick isn't weak," he said. "Weakness is not facing yourself. You've never been weak, Ivy." She didn't reply, clutching the mug tightly. In her feverish haze earlier, she vaguely recalled grabbing his hand, whispering something. She hoped it was a dream, but his eyes made her doubt it. "Do you ever get tired?" she asked, almost a whisper. "Tired of being strong all the time?" Aidan froze, as if her question struck something deep. He lowered his head, fingers gripping the chair's edge. Yes, he admitted, but I don't know how to be anything else. They sat in silence, only the rain tapping the window. Ivy wanted to say more, to reach out, but the image of Sophia Langston at the charity gala flashed in her mind. She turned away, reminding herself not to let her heart take the lead. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray. Ivy felt well enough to leave the hotel. Aiden waited for her in the lobby, his long coat billowing in the breeze. "Thank you," she said awkwardly, "for last night." He didn't respond, just looked at her in a way that made her want to hide. "Let's go," he said, leading her to the car. But before they got in, a cold gust swept through, and Ivy shivered. Without a word, Aiden pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against the wind. "Don't make me worry again," he whispered, his breath warm against her hair. Ivy stood still, her heart pounding so loudly she feared he'd hear it. She wanted to push him away, to keep her distance, but his embrace was too warm, too real. She let herself stay there, just for a moment, before stepping back. "We should go," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Aiden nodded, but his eyes said he knew she was pulling away. Back at her apartment, Ivy received a text from an unknown number. She opened it, and the words chilled her. "Know your place. Aiden is mine. Sophia." Ivy stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the delete button. She didn't reply, didn't dwell on it. She deleted the message, tossed her phone onto the couch, and told herself she wouldn't let herself be hurt again. But as she looked out the window, the memory of Aiden's embrace in the rain lingered in her mind. Chapter 5. Anger and Misunderstandings. Ivy Carter entered Blackwood International's headquarters with a sinking feeling. The air felt off this morning. Furtive glances from colleagues, whispers that halted as she passed. She gripped her briefcase tightly, trying to ignore the unease rising within her. Today was a critical meeting to present the final designs for the 50th floor, and she couldn't let anything shake her focus. But as she pushed open the meeting room door, a comment from the corner stopped her cold. "She sure knows how to climb high," a female employee whispered to her neighbor, loud enough for Ivy to hear. "Using her charm on Mr. Blackwood to land a big contract." Ivy froze, feeling as if she'd been slapped. She turned, locking eyes with the speaker, Lily, a young woman who'd been friendly to her just last week. "What did you say?" Ivy asked, her voice icy. Lily paled, stammering as she looked for an escape. I was just joking," she mumbled, but her averted gaze betrayed the truth. Ivy said nothing. She sat down, opened her laptop, but her hands trembled slightly. The whispers didn't stop, only grew quieter, like invisible knives slicing at her pride. She'd poured everything into this project, sleepless nights, dozens of calls to suppliers, tweaking designs to the smallest detail. And now it was all reduced to charm? The meeting began, but Ivy barely registered it. She presented her designs mechanically, avoiding Aiden's gaze as he sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. He asked a few questions, but without his usual probing edge. She answered curtly, and when the meeting ended, she packed up faster than anyone. "Ms. Carter," Aiden called as she moved to leave. "Stay a moment. I want to review the natural lighting section." Ivy paused but didn't turn. "I'll send a report via email," she said flatly. "I have somewhere to be." She left the room, giving him no chance to respond. But in the elevator, she overheard another colleague whisper, "She sure knows how to get Mr. Blackwood's attention. Definitely not just talent." Ivy clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. She didn't cry. Ivy Carter didn't cry over cheap gossip, but she felt a crack in her heart where she'd started to open up to Aiden, to the project, to herself. The rumors spread like wildfire. By noon, the entire office seemed to know about the shady relationship between Ivy and Aiden. Some avoided her, others gave her looks of curiosity mixed with disdain. Ivy sat alone in the break room, her coffee cold, searching for a reason to keep going. Then came a text from a familiar number, Sophia Langston. "Heard you're making waves at Blackwood International, but you know Aiden isn't the type to be swayed. Don't get your hopes up, Ivy." Ivy stared at the message, humiliation turning to rage. Sophia, the woman who'd stormed into the charity gala like a hurricane, with her arrogant smile and claimed that Aiden was hers. Ivy wasn't surprised Sophia was behind the rumors. But what hurt most was that Aiden hadn't done anything to stop them. She stood, returned to her desk, and drafted an email withdrawing from the project. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, each word a cut to her pride. She didn't need this contract, didn't need Blackwood International, and definitely didn't need Aiden Blackwood. She sent the email, packed her things, and left the building without looking back. Aiden received Ivy's email during a board meeting. He stopped mid-sentence, opened his laptop, and read the brief message. I'm withdrawing from the project for personal reasons. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood, for the opportunity. The room grew tense as Aiden stood abruptly, his eyes darkening. Meetings canceled, he ordered, his voice razor-sharp. No one dared question him as he stormed out, heading straight to the security office. Within an hour, Aiden traced the rumor's source, an anonymous email from Lily, egged on by Sophia via text. He summoned Lily to his office, and in front of the HR director, he said, "You have 5 minutes to clear your desk. Blackwood International doesn't need people who sabotage their team." Lily burst into tears, apologizing profusely, but Aiden was unmoved. When she left, he turned to his assistant. "Find Ms. Carter's address. Now." Rain began to fall as Aiden knocked on the door of Ivy's small Brooklyn apartment. He stood there, coat soaked, hair plastered to his forehead, but his eyes never left the door. When Ivy opened it, she froze at the sight of him. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice cold. She wore an oversized sweater, her hair loosely tied, but her eyes were sharp as knives. "Ivy," Aiden said, stepping forward, though she hadn't invited him in. "You can't quit the project like that." "Why not?" she snapped, crossing her arms. "So I can hear more gossip about sleeping my way to a contract? I'm not your toy, Aiden." Aiden flinched, pain flashing in his eyes. He took her hand, gentle but firm. "I've never seen you as a game," he said, his voice low. "I fired the person who spread the rumor. I won't let anyone hurt you again." Ivy pulled her hand free, turning away. "But you let it happen," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought you were different, but I was wrong." Aiden stepped closer, standing just behind her, not touching but close enough that she felt his breath. "I was wrong not to act sooner," he said. "But I need you, Ivy, not just for the project. I need you to stay for me." Ivy turned, meeting his gaze. She saw sincerity there, but also Sophia's shadow, the woman who kept reminding her Aiden wasn't hers. She took a deep breath and said, "I'll come back. On one condition, don't make me regret it." Aiden nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I promise." She opened the door, gesturing for him to leave. As he stepped out, the rain still fell, and Ivy closed the door, leaning against the wall, her heart pounding. She wanted to believe him, but fear clung to her like a shadow. On his drive back, Aiden received a text from Sophia. "She's really coming back? You should know I don't give up easily, Aiden. And I know about your mother, the secret you don't want anyone to touch." Aiden stared at the screen, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. He didn't reply, but inside a storm was brewing. He couldn't lose Ivy, but his past, and Sophia, threatened to drag him back. Ivy Carter never imagined she'd end up in a relationship like this. Secretive, fraught with risk, and with Aiden Blackwood, the man she'd sworn to keep at arm's length. But weeks after agreeing to return to the project, everything had changed. Late-night work sessions turned into long conversations. Stolen glances became fleeting touches. One evening, as they stood on the top floor of Blackwood International's headquarters, overlooking Manhattan's glittering skyline, Aiden took her hand and said, "I don't want to just be your colleague, Ivy." She'd agreed, but with a condition. "No one can know. Not because I'm ashamed, but because I don't want more rumors." Aiden nodded, and so they began, a discreet relationship where secret smiles and late-night texts became their private world. But Sophia Langston didn't vanish as Ivy had hoped. She appeared at unexpected moments, a call to Aiden when he was with Ivy, an invitation to his office under the guise of discussing old matters. Each instance sent a ripple through Ivy's heart, but she told herself she trusted Aiden. He'd chosen her, hadn't he? One afternoon, as Ivy finalized blueprints in her temporary office, Sophia walked in without knocking. She wore a form-fitting emerald dress, her blonde hair cascading, her eyes sharp as knives. Ivy stopped working, standing tall, ready to face her. Miss Carter, Sophia said, her voice sweet but calculated. I think we need to talk. About Aiden. There's nothing to discuss, Ivy replied coldly. If you want him, his office is upstairs. Sophia smiled, sitting across from her as if she owned the place. Oh, I'm in no rush, but you should know something. Aiden doesn't easily forget his past, especially when it involves his mother. Ivy frowned, unease creeping in. What are you talking about? Sophia tilted her head, her eyes gleaming like a cat toying with prey. You don't know? Aiden's mother worked for your family, a housekeeper if I recall correctly. And her death, well, it wasn't just an accident. Ivy felt the blood drain from her face. She gripped the edge of the desk, forcing herself to stay calm. You're making this up. Am I? Sophia laughed. Ask Aiden. Ask him why your father was investigated for a financial scandal and why his mother paid the price. Ivy didn't respond. Sophia stood, leaving an old photo on the desk, a woman with a gentle smile standing beside a young girl Ivy instantly recognized, herself as a child. Her hands trembled as she picked up the photo, vague memories flooding back, of a kind woman who brought cookies to her house, someone her father called a friend. That evening, Ivy waited for Aiden in his apartment, the photo on the coffee table like an accusation. When he walked in, still in his suit from a meeting, he froze at the sight of her expression. Ivy? He asked cautiously. What's wrong? She slid the photo toward him. You knew from the start, didn't you? Her voice shook, not with anger but with pain. Your mother worked for my family. She died because of a scandal my father was falsely accused of. And you never told me? Aiden stared at the photo, his eyes darkening. He sat across from her, hands clenched. I knew. Some of it, he admitted, his voice low. I knew my mother worked for your family, and she died in an accident. But I didn't know the details. My father never explained. No details? Ivy stood, her voice rising. Aiden, she said your mother died because of my father. You let me fall for you, let me trust you, while you hid this. I didn't want to hurt you, he said, standing and stepping closer. I thought the past didn't matter. Only you and I do now. But it matters to me, Ivy shouted, tears spilling despite her efforts to hold them back. I trusted you, Aiden. I thought we could really… She stopped, shaking her head. I need time. She turned and left the apartment, leaving Aiden standing there, his eyes filled with pain. He wanted to chase her, but his feet felt rooted to the floor. Aiden drove to his father's Long Island estate that night, anger and unease churning within him. Henry Blackwood, a cold man with silver hair and steely eyes, sat in his study by the fireplace. I need the truth, Aiden said without preamble. About Mom, about the Carters. Henry frowned, unsurprised. You're digging up the past for that girl, aren't you? He asked, his tone dismissive. Your mother died in a car accident. That's all you need to know. Not enough, Aiden snapped, slamming his hand on the desk. Sophia knows something, and if you don't tell me, I'll find out myself. Henry went silent, then stood, retrieving an old file from a safe. Your mother wasn't just a housekeeper, he said, his voice heavy. She was an accountant for the Carters. When their company was investigated for fraud, she took the fall to protect that girl's father. She drove out of the city to meet a lawyer, but never made it. Aiden's heart clenched. You mean she sacrificed herself for them? Henry nodded. She believed the girl's father was innocent, and she was right, but the cost was her life. Aiden gripped the file, his mind reeling. He didn't blame Ivy's family. He couldn't, but he blamed himself for letting this secret hurt her. At dawn, Aiden knocked on Ivy's apartment door. She opened it, her eyes red, clearly sleepless. He said nothing, just knelt before her, heedless of the cold floor. I'm sorry, he said, his voice hoarse. I found the truth. My mother chose to protect your family, and I never wanted you to feel guilty for it. I don't want to lose you over the past, Ivy. I love you. Ivy looked at him, tears welling again. She wanted to stay angry, to push him away, but her heart wouldn't let her. She knelt, wrapping her arms around him, whispering, I love you too, but don't hide things from me again, okay? Aiden held her tightly as if afraid she'd slip away. Never, he promised, and for the first time, the past no longer felt like a burden. Chapter 6. Warmer than I thought. Ivy Carter never imagined she'd openly admit her feelings for anyone, let alone Aiden Blackwood, in front of a corporation like Blackwood International. But after everything they'd been through, misunderstandings, secrets, and moments that set her heart racing, she was done hiding. One morning as they entered the meeting room, Aiden took her hand in front of the project directors. No explanation, just a steady look, and everyone knew they were together. Curious glances followed immediately. Some smiled, some whispered, and a few looked at Ivy as if she'd won the lottery or walked into a trap. She kept her back straight, refusing to let those stares shake her. She'd fought too hard to get here, and she wouldn't let anyone make her feel small. But Sophia Langston wouldn't let things rest. One afternoon, while Ivy was checking construction progress on the 50th floor, a new rumor spread. An anonymous email sent to all senior staff claimed Aiden was using Ivy to keep her on the project, that his feelings were a ploy to ensure the contract's timely completion. Ivy received the email while standing amid the construction site, and her blood boiled, not because she believed it, but because she knew who was behind it. Sophia. She found Sophia in the office break room, sipping coffee with a smug air. Ivy walked in, closed the door, her gaze sharp as a blade. "You think these tricks will make me leave?" Ivy asked, her voice cold. "You're wrong, Sophia." Sophia shrugged, smiling. "I'm just helping people see the truth. Aiden doesn't love you, Ivy. He needs you for the project. When it's done, what will you be? A forgotten designer?" Ivy clenched her fist but didn't shout as she once had at Aiden on their first meeting. Instead, she stepped closer, her voice low but powerful. "He doesn't need me to succeed, and I don't need him to shine. But he chose me, and I chose him. You can't change that, no matter how many rumors you spread." Sophia paled, her smile fading. She stood about to speak, but Ivy turned and left, leaving her with palpable defeat. The rumor was quickly quashed when Aiden publicly debunked the email in a meeting, stating that anyone continuing to spread it would face consequences. Sophia didn't show up at the office after that. With Sophia out of the picture, Aiden changed. Not the cold CEO Ivy once clashed with. One evening, as she stayed late to finish blueprints, he appeared with a box of homemade food, spaghetti with tomato sauce and meatballs, fragrant enough to make her stomach rumble. "You cooked this?" Ivy asked, surprised as she sat at the table in his office. Aiden shrugged, but his lips curved. "I don't just sign contracts, Miss Carter." She laughed, feeling for the first time that he was truly approachable. They ate, talking about things unrelated to work, her favorite movie, the jazz he listened to while driving. When she shared how she once botched cookies for her mom, he laughed, a warm sound she wanted to hear forever. But Aiden had surprising moments too. One day, as Ivy chatted with a male colleague about blueprints, she noticed Aiden a few steps away, his eyes darkening. When they were alone, he pulled her close, his voice low. "I didn't like how he looked at you." Ivy raised an eyebrow, laughing. "Jealous, Mr. Blackwood?" He didn't deny it, just tightened his grip on her hand. "Maybe. You're mine, Ivy." She blushed but didn't pull away. She realized his jealousy wasn't control. It was his way of showing she mattered more to him than anything. Every evening, as Ivy left the office, she found Aiden waiting in the lobby, though he never admitted he did it on purpose. He stood there, long coat swaying, his gaze softening when he saw her. Once when it rained, he held an umbrella over her, letting his own shoulder get soaked. Ivy looked at him, her heart racing. He wasn't just a cold CEO. He was a man who'd do anything for her. One evening, as they sat on the couch in Ivy's apartment, she pulled a white silk handkerchief from her bag, delicately embroidered with a green A. She handed it to him, her voice shy. "This time, I'm giving it back," she said, referencing the handkerchief he'd given her on their first meeting. "But with my whole heart." Aiden took it, his eyes lighting up like never before. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she felt his heartbeat. "You don't know how much you mean to me, Ivy," he whispered. She rested her head on his shoulder, happiness flooding her. For the first time, she trusted him completely. No doubts, no fears. The grand opening of Blackwood International's new headquarters was Manhattan's centerpiece. Under dazzling lights, hundreds of guests, business partners, reporters, gathered in the grand lobby, where Ivy's glass walls and hanging gardens sparkled like a work of art. Ivy stood amid the crowd in a silver gown that hugged her frame, feeling both proud and nervous. This was her achievement, Aiden's and the team's. But the camera flashes and reporters' questions made her tense. Aiden stood beside her, confidently fielding inquiries, but when one turned to Ivy, his tone cut like a knife. "Ms. Carter, is it true you didn't leverage your relationship with Mr. Blackwood to advance? A freelance designer landing such a big contract. It's suspicious." The air seemed to still. Ivy felt every eye on her, as if tearing her apart. She opened her mouth to respond, but fear of losing her freedom, her career, everything she'd built with sweat and tears, surged. She turned, walking away, leaving the murmurs behind. "Ivy!" Aiden called, his voice rising above the crowd. He chased her, heedless of cameras or curious stares. He grabbed her hand in the middle of the street, under streetlights and flashing cameras. "Don't go," he said, his eyes unwavering. "She doesn't need me to shine," he declared, loud enough for all to hear. "But I need her to live." Ivy stopped, her heart pounding. She looked at him, saw the sincerity in his eyes, and her fears melted away. She stepped forward, pulled his collar down, and kissed him in front of everyone. A deep, fierce kiss, as if the world no longer existed. The crowd applauded, camera flashes flared, and the video went viral. A year later, Ivy and Aiden stood on the balcony of their shared apartment, gazing at glittering Manhattan. Ivy leaned into his shoulder, teasing, "If I hadn't yelled at you that first day, would you still have fallen for me?" Aiden laughed, pulling her close. "Yell or not, I'd have found a way to make you mine." She laughed loudly, and under the night sky, they knew that no matter how the world changed, they'd always belong to each other. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together.